These are Nebraska corn farmers. They work in acres, not hours, harvesting the energy and climate solutions the world needs. We are proud to stand with you.
The success of tomorrow's soy industry depends on the actions we take today. The future is here, and the time to move is now.
Market Journal Television for Agricultural Business Decisions is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources in partnership with the Nebraska Rural Radio Association. Promotional support provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine and partial funding provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board and the Nebraska Corn Board.
Well, hi everyone, I'm Bryce Duskett, and thank you very much for joining us today on Market Journal. Harvest continues to be in full swing across the region, and we've got a lot to cover as part of this week's broadcast. Up first, the University of Nebraska-Lincoln plant pathologist Dylan Mangiel. He'll be explaining why soil sampling is so important following the harvest season. Livestock analyst Kyle Bumsted, he is standing by and ready to share some of his market insights with us for this week. And of course, a reminder, safety a big focus for this time of the year. We've got some valuable tips on how to keep you and your workforce safe during this busy harvest season. Speaking of being busy, earlier this week we caught up with Dave Merrell. He is a crop producer near St. Edward, Nebraska. He was kind enough to invite our crew out to his place and give us an update on how things are going in his neck of the woods as part of this week's In the Field Update. How are things going harvest progress-wise at this point, farming in the Boone County region?
Well, we're just about to finish up soybeans and get started on some corn. I think most people around here have probably already finished their soybeans and are testing the corn, finding out what it's like and what the moistures are. So there was quite a bit of corn taken out for high moisture corn for feedlots early, but now we're just into some of the dry corn.
Okay. Well, how is this year's harvest going for both corn and soybeans compared to previous years in terms of the yield and quality for your region of the state, Dave?
Yields on beans have been probably the best beans I've had in a long time. They've been high 70s, mid 70s. That's maybe for some people normal, but for me that's pretty good. And corn-wise, I haven't really gotten into the corn yet, but from what I've been out and walked around and looked, it looks like it's going to be a really good corn yield too.
Sounds like it's been a pretty good growing season for you, but as you look back on the past several months, any particular challenges you face with growing crops for you?
Well, the last couple of years we've had a lot of issues with hail and wind. This year was one of the first years we haven't had any hail or wind. Then of course we've had drought the last couple of years. This year was kind of a really unique year. We had a lot of wet beginning of the season and then dried off here at the end. So now we're looking at drought, very dry conditions. So every year's a little bit different, and irrigation is a must for us. So that's always a challenge during the growing season.
Absolutely. Well, now that we are into harvest, making your way through soybeans, getting ready for the corn up next, we talk about the markets, of course, all the time here on the show. I'm curious, as a Nebraska corn farmer, how do some of the current market conditions and grain prices influence your decisions when it comes to harvest and perhaps storage?
Well, quite a bit, I guess, because we have to decide whether we want to store the grain or we want to deliver it straight to the elevator and get it sold. We have to get if we're paying interest on a loan, we need to get that income so we can stop that interest payment. Maybe we got to pay some things early, get some early discounts. So we need that income. So sometimes it's better to just deliver the grain, get it sold, take the income.
Yep. Appreciate your insight on that front. Any new technology or equipment you're trying out in your operation this year, Dave?
Well, we were just talking about I have a drone now. I had never had a drone before, but need to go out. I need to really use that a lot more. Use it for checking pivots, checking fields, trying to figure out what things are like out over the field, it really gives you a good idea what your field looks like that you can't tell from the ground. We've got some scales on our grain carts this year that we've never had before. It's going to help us a lot with tracking where and how much our grain is going to. And so those things are helping us a lot with the farming operation.
Mm-hmm. Well, it seems like we've largely talked about corn and soybeans, but you mentioned you also grow alfalfa, so let's wrap up on that front. How were the different cuttings of alfalfa this year?
Well, alfalfa was kind of a challenge this year because of the rain we had early on. It seemed like every time we knocked the hay down, it would rain. And then just with the humidity we had early, it just would not dry. It took forever to dry. That third cut in hay took 2 weeks to dry down. And finally got the hay put up, but it was a challenge to get the hay done this year with all the humidity and the rain that we had.
Well, Dave, certainly wish you and your crew safe rest of the harvest season. Appreciate you joining us today.
All right, thanks, Bryce.
It is always great to hear from producers all across the state. And speaking of that, from the Panhandle to eastern Nebraska, we have worked hard with this series this year to feature farmers all across the state. If you know of an area that we didn't miss, I want to invite you to let us know about it. You can drop us an email and we'll be in touch with somebody in your area, perhaps you, very soon. As we push through another harvest season, it can be easy this time of the year to get in a hurry from time to time. However, being in a rush can, of course, lead to some safety oversights. Market Journal's Bill Dodd recently spoke with an extension educator to get some tips when it comes to harvest safety.
As our state producers continue to push through another harvest season, it may be easy to get in a hurry from time to time. However, being in a rush can sometimes lead to oversights in safety. According to the CDC, 368 farmers and farm workers lost their lives to work-related injuries in 2020. That number translates to a staggering 18 deaths per 100,000 workers. Most notable among those statistics was the fact that transportation incidents are the leading cause of those fatalities.
So probably one of the first things when we look at harvest safety is just slowing down. And that's not just for our farmers, but that's everybody on the road. We're in a hurry. We want to get where we're going, whether we're late for a ball game or whatever the situation is. We have slow-moving traffic, combines, tractors. They can only go so fast. So being patient and kind and waiting for them. But even as us as farmers trying to get our combines and everything to the field and getting everything done before the weather changes, we sometimes get in a rush too. So slow down, take your time. But when you're on the road, I don't care who you are, make sure you're signaling correctly, making sure that you're not looking at devices. It doesn't take very long to go 100 feet or a quarter of a mile when the tractor in front of you can only go 15 miles per hour and you're going 65, 70. It's a blink of an eye. Then the other big thing for all of our producers that are moving equipment, if you can, try to not do it during those high traffic times. So when we know the kids are going to and from school, try to avoid dusk because it's hard to see. Make sure you have all your flashers on and just take your time is my biggest thing when it comes to road safety and harvest right now.
Naturally, when harvesting grain, it will need to be stored somewhere. And with that in mind, grain bin safety should be a top concern for producers.
So grain storage as a whole, when we're looking at, as we're putting it on those grain carts, they're heavy loads. Making sure we're trying to make sure those loads are even. And if we're on uneven terrain, making sure we're taking that turn correctly so we don't overload it or tip the grain cart or the trucks or any component like that. Now, once we get to where we're going to store the grain, whether it's a grain bin, harvest store, open pit, be aware of where those augers are at. Be aware of PTO shafts in particular. Make sure we don't get loose lying equipment in there. If we run into situations in grain bins and we need to climb in there because something isn't going right, please, please, please do not go in there by yourself. That needs to be a two-person team because that grain can shift very quickly. You can be entrapped, and if you have nobody with you, they don't know it. And in all reality, if you're going to climb in the bin, the recommendation is that you have a safety harness on as you go into those bins. That way, if we do have a collapse, we have a way to pull you out of that bin. The other big components, think about where all the safety equipment is at, where is electrical shutdowns, if for some odd reason the sweeper arms aren't working right, the PTO shafts or the augers aren't working correctly, know how to turn those off quickly and rapidly. And the other one with, when we're looking at grain bins and all the augers, the one thing a lot of guys don't want to talk about is hearing protection. It is loud. It is extremely loud. Trying to wear some type of ear protection is really critical. I'm really going to advise, if you have your kids or grandkids out there working, helping you out, 8, 9, 10 years old, we really need to be protecting their ears, because they only get that hearing once, and we don't want them saying "what" at the age of 15 nearly as much as possible. So those are some steps around the grain bin that we want to take into consideration as we go through the harvest season.
As harvest season has progressed in Nebraska, the weather has remained particularly dry this year, which has been good news for producers who want to get their crop out of the field with little delay. However, a lack of moisture drying down crops coupled with high winds is a perfect recipe for accidental fires.
Number one is just basically maintenance, making sure we're maintaining our combine, making sure everything is running good and properly the way it's supposed to. Number two is cleaning up your machine at the end of the day. But if we think about it, we get all those corn leaves and soybean debris, especially up around those exhaust manifolds. It's extremely, extremely hot, especially with the emission rates and how they have to combust. With it being so hot, if we don't remove that debris and it's always standing there, that's a place for it to ignite. The other place we can see debris ignite is around all those bearings. We know bearings are going to go out. We can't always predict those, but they get hot. So just daily maintenance and cleaning that component off around those high flammable areas really helps reduce your risk. And then the number three, is really, once again, coming into cleanliness of that combine. We're going to be changing out oil filters. We have to change oil. Try to make sure that if we spill oil, that we're cleaning it up and not just leaving it on the platforms or on the side of the combine. Once again, it's highly combustible. We get a little bit of a spark, it isn't going to take much for it to go poof, and then we're going to be in a dire situation.
As producers continue to work diligently through this critical time of year, the top priority during harvest season should first and foremost be safety and fire prevention. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.
Thanks for that information, Bill. If you'd like to hear more from Amy on this topic, you can check out her most recent articles by visiting the website cropwatch.unl.edu. Up next, it's our chance to check in on both the grain and livestock markets, and joining the broadcast is livestock analyst Kyle Bumsted. Kyle, good day to you. Thank you very much for the time.
You bet. Thank you.
Let's start on the corn and soybean front, then we'll pivot over to the cattle. I know you like to spend a lot of our time focusing on that, which we appreciate. On the grain front, if we look back at the charts, when it comes to the futures, since about October 1st timeframe for both corn and soybeans, we've been going lower, lower, lower. Why is that in your opinion?
Oh, harvest pressure. It's harvest pressure. It's harvest time here, and I was talking with some producers here this morning, here middle of the week, and we're kind of in the camp that bean harvest is probably going to be all wrapped up here for most of the Midwest here by the end of the week. And it's very interesting to see on some of these days. We've seen some big sell-offs here. We've seen the commercial spreads really start to pick up. So one spread that I'm really keen on watching here is that May-July corn spread. It's been gaining ground here. There's about 11 to 11.25 cents carry out there from May to July. So it's kind of telling me that longer term, there's still some issues out there in the bean market as far as watching that forward curve out there. And South America's crop isn't in the bin yet, and they've had some chances of rain down there. They've gotten some rains, and there's still some more forecast rains. But if there was huge amounts of rain in the forecast where it was going to be a massive monster crop, I mean, you'd see that spread really build the carry, but it's kind of tightened in. Same kind of situation here with corn. Corn has this round number reliance, as some in the industry like to call it, and I like to use that term too, because corn likes round numbers, and it really likes dime increments too. It's like, oh, here's $4, then there's $4.10, then there's $4.20, and so on and so forth. And then consequently on the way down, there's $4.20, then there's $4.10, then there's $4 on the way down. And so far, for the most part during the week, corn did a great job of holding the $4 mark here. Of course, we're not quite to the end of the week yet, but Corn has been holding that $4 round number reliance there, and same kind of thing there too. The spreads have been slowly picking up, and we've seen some decent export sales here too. So when I see those spreads start to pick up during the day session, and it really kind of shows me that maybe the non-commercial selling is kind of getting wrapped up for the day, and then the commercials are coming in here starting to get some buy orders put in here, and there's some export sales being made. And in the case of the non-commercials here, last week when we got the Commitments Traders report out last Friday, they simply overshot. I mean, they had put on way too many. They'd put on quite a bit of length out there, maybe way too much length in a short amount of time, both corn and beans. And I think that this week here, they really kind of had to pare that back and get themselves kind of more rebalanced. So that's kind of the takeaway here as far as the corn and the bean market. And the wheat market, that thing there has been all over the board. We've seen it have some swings here due to geopolitical issues over in the Middle East. And then we've also got rain allegedly coming through here, the Midwest here in the hard red wheat growing areas here this week. And I really hope we get it. We could use some rain up here in Nebraska, but I hope they get it down there too, because I know there's a lot of producers that are sitting on the fence. Do we seed more or do we stop, or what do we do? That's kind of the wheat market in a nutshell there. And those spreads there are still pretty bearish. There's still a lot of wheat in the world, and there's still a lot of carry in that wheat complex.
Yeah, I appreciate your overview of corn, soybeans, and wheat. Let's head over to the livestock sector, Kyle. Begin on live cattle. What are some of the factors you're watching for that market?
Oh, live cattle, they've been it's been crazy. They've been on a really nice uptrend here, a nice rally here the last few weeks. But I have been in the camp that we could see a setback, and I think we are kind of at that pivotal point here as we wrap up the week. Are we going to go down and test Tuesday's low in this December contract, that 185.55? If we take out that 185.55 on a closing basis, I think we could see the non-commercials come in here and sell this thing a little bit more. Now, same kind of situation here on this cattle complex, both feeders and live cattle. As we saw some deep sell-offs here in this complex this week, or bigger sell-offs than we've been accustomed to seeing, we did see the commercials come in here and start to buy this thing. And when I speak of the commercials buying here, last week they bought a lot of cattle here. As far as fats go, the packers got a lot of cattle, a lot of inventory lined up. So the question is, and I've had a lot of people ask me, when are the packers going to start bidding this week? Well, I think it's going to be late week and maybe even Saturday. We're probably going to trade some cattle over the weekend here if they need cattle. But we bought a lot of cattle last week here, the packers did. And those cattle are for deferred delivery too. So a little bit of an issue there too, that they've got enough inventory around here short term. Some of those cattle are slotted for delivery here at the end of the month. Some are second week in November. Some are even third week in November. And I do know a few feed yards up here in the north that are getting some big cattle here. It's been really good, decent growing weather here for cattle. And some of those cattle are tipping the scale 1,800 pounds. So I do know some folks, if they get a steady bid, they're going to take it just because they want to get some wheels underneath some cattle here, because they're starting to lose some big ones out there. On the feeder cattle side of things here, same kind of situation here. We're seeing a decent rally here. There's been a lot of interest here in feeders, but the ballers are coming to town right now, and there's going to come a point in time, I think, here over the next couple of weeks here, we're going to start to enter into a holiday mode or holiday type trade here on this feeder cattle market here. And you're going to see less sales and you're going to see less feeder cattle going into that index number. And that's going to have an effect on this market as well. But on the pullbacks, we've seen some decent commercial support. But on the same token here, too, we saw some decent sell-offs here this week early. And it was on Tuesday as the funds kind of positioned themselves here for the Commitments Traders Week. They simply kind of overshot themselves here in the cattle and feeder cattle market last week, too. I think they got themselves the cart ahead of the horse, so to speak. They got a little too much bought, and they kind of had to pare their position back here and see if the commercials were going to catch up and try to support this market, too.
Okay, real quick, Kyle, I want to get your thoughts on box beef prices. Where do you see that market right now? Where's it headed as we prepare to end up, this is hard to say, but as we go through that holiday season and look to a new year?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I know there's been a lot of talk and chatter about the box beef market. And speaking of box beef, I think if boxes are to hold and even climb towards the end of the week here, as they've been climbing all week, I think you're going to see feed yards hold out for another dollar higher potentially here, at least up here in the north. They're going to try to hold out for $1 higher. But to answer your question, looking at some of the numbers here, I mean, the government still tells us that everything's going good out there as far as the economy goes. So when that egg starts to crack, then I think the box beef market starts to crack. But we will get to a point here. We're over 300. We're well over 300 on the choice box right now. And I think if we were to get that up in that 330, 340 range, I think that might start to slow the consumer buying down just a little bit. But that remains to be seen yet. We haven't seen that yet, so we aren't even that high. So I'm still thinking this box beef market has some room to go to the upside. It's just how much more I'm in question of that here as we get into this holiday season. Typically, we see a decent holiday push here, and that's going to start here towards about right now, towards the end of the month, so we can get some of that stuff procured here for the holiday season.
Thanks again to Kyle for joining us on the broadcast. Coming up next week, we will be joined by Heather Ramsey with the ARC Group. As always, we invite your questions here on the show. So if you have one for Heather, go ahead and email us or get in touch on social media. That's where we will get your message and pass it right along to Heather. Well, quickly unlock your phone and tap an app. Right away, you can have access to a live video feed inside your hog barn no matter where you are. With technology like the NewTrack system developed by researchers at the University of Nebraska, producers can track the behavior of individual pigs. You can read about this new system in the October issue of the Nebraska Farmer. Check your mailbox. Well, it is that time of the show where we check in on weather with Nebraska Extension Ag Meteorologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Eric Hunt. Eric, we're getting some overnight cold snaps, bit chilly out there some of the mornings, and some freezing conditions observed across the state. How much longer can we see the warm weather holding out?
Thanks, Bryce. Looks like we're going to be relatively warm for October for most of next week and probably for a good portion of the rest of the month. Biggest story in this part of the country, though, has been the complete lack of precipitation for the last several weeks across Nebraska and the northern plains and north central U.S. in general. These show precipitation rankings. That basically means we've been record dry or near record dry for everywhere in the state, and similar story for a lot of our neighboring states to the east and to the north of us. This lack of precipitation, warmer temperatures has led to a lot of rapid and drought intensification. So we now have over 80% of the state classified as drought on the U.S. Drought Monitor, and almost 50% of the state is currently classified as severe drought on the U.S. Drought Monitor. All these counties that are shown in red here have at least some portion of severe drought, and counties in maroon are places where we have 8 consecutive weeks or more with severe drought in that some portion of the county. Soil moisture right now is just basically abysmal, 5th percentile or worse across the entire state and pretty much this entire region of the country at the moment. And the reason we've seen a lot of this is we've had very persistent troughing across the Gulf of Alaska, ridging here across the western portion of the U.S. And until we really significantly break this pattern, we're not going to get a lot of precipitation coming up into the central portion of the U.S. Hopefully this starts breaking at some point in a more regular way as we move into the month of November. We do at least have a chance of precipitation, though, in the next several days, starting in western Nebraska this week. And so hopefully by the time you're watching this in western Nebraska, it is raining or has been raining at least a little bit Friday night into Saturday. And I think as this starts ejecting out into the plains on Monday, we will see at least see chances of precipitation for central and eastern Nebraska as well. Maybe even a little bit of chance of severe weather, something to watch out for. This does not look like a significant amount of precipitation for a lot of the state. Southwestern Nebraska may pick up a ½ inch to an inch. This will be very needed precipitation for the wheat. But again, I do think we are going to look at least a chance of picking up a 1/10, a 1/4 inch of rain for pretty much everybody in the east, maybe closer to ½ inch as we get closer to the Kansas border. This is certainly not going to break the drought, but it'll be the best precipitation a lot of us have seen in some cases several weeks, and at least will help put the wildfire risk down a little bit, which has been a big problem around here of late. So getting that wildfire risk reduced, even if it's for a couple of days, will be pretty big. We go right back to ridging as we get later in the week, so we're probably going to be mostly seeing highs in the 70s this next week. Not necessarily seeing any significantly cold nights coming up the next week either. A lot of places did see some sub-freezing temperatures across the state this last week. Not necessarily seeing that widespread this next week. CPC keeps us relatively warm for the remainder of the month. I do think we're going to have a chance of bringing in some much colder air as we get toward Halloween. A little bit of signal models for that. Nothing too consistent just yet, though. CPC also keeps brings some chances of precipitation for eastern Nebraska and further into the Midwest. I think this is a little optimistic, but we'll see what happens. Soil temperatures right now are mostly in the 50s across the state, and here's our temperature precipitation around it. Back to you, Bryce.
All right, thank you very much, Eric. Good overview of what's happening in the world of weather. Finally today, as farmers finish getting crops out to one field and heading to another, there's a golden opportunity to take some soil samples during any downtime between those fields. This practice can give you a better indication of how to prepare for the next planting season and may help you avoid headaches such as soybean cyst nematodes. Let's catch up with University of Nebraska-Lincoln plant pathologist Dylan Mangiel as part of this week's Crop Talk. If you have unexplained yield loss in your soybean fields, might be soybean cyst nematodes. We're going to be talking about that with Dylan Mangiel from Nebraska Extension. And Dylan, why is now in October the best time to be testing?
This is the best time of year because we got crops coming out of the field. growers might have a little bit more time on their hand, but the real big reason is this is the time of year when they're at their peak level in the soil. So all summer long, those populations have been increasing. They go through a generation every 28 days. And after 3 or 4 of those, you've got really high levels of that, especially in those soybean fields that just came out of production.
We're in 2/3, soybean cyst nematode is in 2/3 of the state of Nebraska counties now as you look at the map. Who should be testing?
Yeah, it's in 2/3, and those 2/3 are the soybean producing areas. So it's pretty much in all those soybean producing counties, but it's not in every field. So knowing if it's in your field or knowing which of your fields it's in could help you plan to keep it just in those fields and not spread it to new ones. So really, anyone who's farming soybeans should know their SCN status, because it can still yield without any above ground symptoms in many cases. So we don't really know if it's there without testing.
Well, let's talk about sending samples, and it's free because of the Nebraska Soybean Board.
Yes, the Nebraska Soybean Board has funded a program, free soybean cyst nematode testing for any Nebraska grower. All you've got to do is put soil in a bag and send it into the UNL Plant and Pest Diagnostic Clinic. And if you need bags, we'll even send those out to growers as well, just to make that as easy as possible.
I'll hold the bags. I want to see you take a sample.
Yeah.
Show us the right way to do this.
So it's pretty simple. The nematodes are going to stay in that top 6 inches of the soil. So they're not going to drop down like other nematodes in corn might do. And we're in a cornfield, and just note that you can test out of cycle if you're in your corn rotation, but levels might be a little bit lower, but it will tell you if it's still there. So all you've got to do is get that top 6 inches of soil. We can take a core with a simple soil probe like this. We can see that, put it in a bucket, and what I recommend is taking several cores throughout a field, or if you've got those areas of unexplained yield loss, walk throughout your field, find those areas. Once you've got a sample in a bucket, you can take that, break those chunks up, and it's as simple as pouring a few cores, maybe 10 cores or so in a bag, and then sending those samples into us. And if you don't have, we can put those in there if you'd like, if you don't have a soil probe, you can just go ahead and use a spade or a shovel, anything. We just need that top 6 inches of soil. So send in a blended sample and we can count the nematodes.
So again, I'll mention this is a free resource for all Nebraska soybean farmers to be able to send those samples in. But what happens when that gets into the lab? What are you guys looking at from there?
Yep, so once they get into the lab, we take those samples, and it's really a process of separating the nematodes from the soil. So we use a series of sieves to separate those out. We'll get the cysts, we'll break those open because they're full of eggs, and then we'll take those eggs to a microscope and we'll count the amount that's under there. And then from that amount of nematodes is directly proportional to the amount of yield loss that you'll be having in that field. So we can send that result back to the grower or whoever's sending that soil sample, and you can kind of estimate what kind of yield loss you'll experience with those nematodes.
If you'd like more information on soil sampling and diagnostic testing, you can visit UNL's Plant and Pest Diagnostic Center, their website. We've taken the liberty of posting a direct link to that page along with the story. Find that over on the Market Journal homepage. Folks, that is going to do it for this week's show. If you missed one of our stories, we encourage you to follow Market Journal on the YouTube page and also follow us on social media where you can join in on the conversation. We hope to see you back here next time, but until then, I'm Bryce Duskett, wishing you a safe and productive week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.